Okay, this is my specialty. My specialty is asking um offensive questions, but not
Go for
meaning
it.
to. So let me, and knowing Kevin Ogar and Alec, they always remind me it's not offensive if you're trying to come from a good place. So
Yes,
I'm coming from a good place, just truly trying to get a better understanding.
please.
Um, can these brain injuries just be developed? In other words, do I have a brain injury? Because sometimes I can't remember things and I can't pay attention well. Can they be developed just without any trauma?
Not generally organically. I mean, there are all kinds of
But
things.
it's you're saying there's a chance.
I don't know your history well enough, but there's always a chance for something like a post-concussive syndrome. You get hit in the head enough times, and that can cause memory difficulties. But I use those examples to put it to scale, right? Because we all sort of know that feeling, but that sort of tip of the tongue phenomenon where you just can't say the word. Now magnify that by 10 or 100 or 200 depending on the level of injury, and that is why in some ways it translates really well into the gym, because those folks have to practice. They just have to practice using their words. And so in the gym, sometimes we practice just naming what the items are, remembering the names of the members, describing what they did in a workout, and it's just another opportunity to use language to help with new learning.
Well, let me ask you another offensive question.
Please.
When I was growing up, there was no ADD or
Yeah.
ADHD, right? I'm 43. So, graduated high school 96, college 2000. I don't know how old you are. You look a little younger than me.
Not
Um,
much.
Not much. Okay. But and there's other things happening this day and age amongst teenagers. And I'm like, that wasn't an option when I was 15, 16,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah.
Um, what's your opinion on that? As someone who's studied this. And I know you probably have to toe a line that I don't have to
Yes.
toe. But I
Ask.
mean, in other words, when I was a kid, it wasn't, hey, you may have ADHD. It was like, this kid doesn't pay attention in class, put him in the remedial class, right? And those were the kids that got, had a stigma associated.
Yeah.
Is Was ADHD not a thing? Is it still not a thing? Is it a thing that too many people are getting lumped into? And again, I'm truly just curious.
Yeah, I grew up in the same age as you did, where it was like nobody had ADD, and then suddenly everybody had EDD. And I think that we've sometimes shuffled through different diagnoses. I think now there are other things that are a little more en vogue. Um, you know, as a speech pathologist, it's dealing with folks who have brain injury, for example. It's hard when everyone's like, oh, I'm so ADD right now, or oh, I can't remember. I never remember anything, because in some ways that's dismissive, because there are
Right.
individuals whose brains are truly impacted. Um,
And I don't want to be clear, like we're talking about acute injury for a lot of these
yes.
people, right?
Yeah.
So obviously there's some sort of trauma, and I'm
Yeah.
assuming under an MRI, is that what you would go under? A scan,
MRI or CT
right?
scan. Yep.
You can see it. I mean, I've watched enough CSI and whatnot to see the red and whatnot in the brain. Things are definitely happening in there.
Yeah.
And, to a fault, I'd say the same thing. It's like when I was a kid, not everyone was being diagnosed with autism or
Right.
Asperger's. And it was clearly something then. It just, we didn't know enough about it. So I'm just wondering, is it we didn't know about it, or is it just an easy classification to put a kid in like, oh, he doesn't pay attention. Maybe it's you're feeding him like sugar nonstop, right? There's other aspects to it.
Yeah.
Maybe he's just got to be controlled a little better, right? Like if
Yeah.
someone, I have a 7 month old, and in a few years, if they were like, she has ADHD, I'd be like, cool. What can I do naturally
Right.
rather than just saying she has ADHD and now you have an excuse to, not pay
Right.
attention.
Right. And I think science is always advancing, right? And what we always talk about the brain, I worked with a physician who used to say the brain is the final frontier of medicine. So there's still a lot that we don't know about the brain, what's going on in terms of diagnoses, how we can treat these different things. So sometimes I think it's more that we start to learn more about the brain and we see, oh, we can treat that. Um, but yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned about cognition in general is such a tricky beast, as is language, that we don't always know what's happening with the brain. And I think there's a lot of kind of pivoting a little bit. There's a lot of research now about what fitness can do for the brain, which is sort of how I ended up tying these things together. There's we know there's a lot of research, for example, about conditions where there are now psychiatrists who prescribe exercise because it actually makes changes in the brain when you work out. And what we're starting to see more evidence of now is that exercise actually changes the brain at the cellular level, and it primes the brain for new learning. So there are specific studies that show that there's an increase in the area of the brain called the hippocampus, which is responsible for new learning. So when you exercise, your brain is actually primed to learn, to lay down new memories, to learn new things, which is why it's a great environment for individuals with neurological conditions.